All right, it is the first episode of Morning Kick Around, and we're rolling out the gates on Culture Wars, one of the most contentious segments on the show coming your way. And one thing that really sticks out as we're watching European soccer and watching the Premier League is the American influence, especially at the ownership level. 9 of the 20 teams in the Premier League, and in maybe even more, with talks of Everton perhaps being bought out by an American group. So this brings me to the culture war subject of the day. What happens first? A complete makeover of the Premier League business model or promotion and relegation in the United States. What happens first, Jason?
Wow. Well, okay. Let's first say that while we have a question of whether or not the United States has a world-class player out there right now, we definitely have some world-class money being thrown around by ownership groups and these the private equity firms and all those things. I don't know that. I mean, it's interesting that you present this question of the Premier League business model. I don't even know if I know what that means, Robert. And I mean, maybe you meant it to be pretty open-ended because the Premier League right now is going through this massive upheaval over what makes a healthy football club, how clubs should act, whether clubs should be allowed to spend their way to a higher level if they're not generating that money from income that the club itself can find, right? So this is the PSR question. This is the financial fair play question. If I buy a soccer club and I have billions of dollars at my disposal, should I be allowed to just give my money basically to the club and spend it all to make my club better, or do I have to find a way to just? I mean, it all feels very money laundering kind of vibes here, right? This is what we're talking. I don't know that that's what it is because it's so out in the open. But this idea of like you have to balance your income versus your spending and all those things. If that's what you mean, if the business model, meaning will it change in a way that is closer to that or gets that becomes more normalized or maybe a salary cap is coming. I find that really hard to believe, and yet the American influence could push us in that direction.
I mean, the Premier League is governed essentially by ownership, and they vote on things. The ownership of each club votes on things, and there's been some more radical American-minded things proposed to these the board members. And you feel like if the Americans had the majority, if there was ever a time that like a hard salary cap or spending
Yeah.
limits or some sort of a ceiling on what is possible for these clubs to do. Obviously, we're seeing it. It's a little bit murky with how teams are being punished for not being within these guidelines. But I was looking at an article. I think it was from Sportico, and they kind of just like run down the list of all the losses that these teams come
Yeah.
across.
Yeah.
And then they juxtapose that with these American owners like the Glazers and Stan Kroenke, but you compare that to the money that they make on their American franchises. It's night and day, like gargantuan losses on the soccer side and then gargantuan gains on the American side. You feel like the American owners are going to have kind of one thing in mind.
Well, it makes you wonder why they're buying into football clubs if this is the way the balance sheet looks, right? I didn't go to Wharton or anything, but I get the basic idea that you don't want to lose money. If you have a business, the idea is to not to lose money. So why would American owners, why would anybody, right, buy into a football club if it's just going to hemorrhage cash? But yeah, maybe that's part of this, that there is this idea of let's push it culturally, let's push it towards. Well, first of all, I think there is an idea among American ownership in particular that the sky is the limit, that there is no ceiling yet defined for these clubs when it comes to their global brand power. Manchester City, lots of Manchester United in particular, Liverpool, they've made huge inroads in Asia. Right? We know this. They go on Asian tours. They're mobbed. There's millions and millions and millions of fans in Asia following the Premier League. I think the idea is, from an American perspective, we're not even close to tapping out the American market when it comes to soccer, right? We see all this growth, and you and I, over the course of this show, are going to be talking about all those changes. And I've been doing this, talking about soccer, writing about soccer for a decade and a half, and the amount of changes that have happened in terms of the popularity of the sport are ridiculous, and they're huge. But you still have to look for somebody to talk about soccer with as an American. You still have to put yourself in the right situation to have that conversation. It's not obvious yet. People don't wear it on their sleeve as much as they do with their NFL team or their basketball team or whatever. And I think that these owners, whether it's the Bowley and Igbali at the Chelsea group, or Friedkin here, or Redbird in Milan, or any of them, they see a possibility of exploding their team's popularity in America, which means that if the balance sheet looks bad now, it doesn't have to look bad in the future if they make the right moves. It is a gamble. It's a risk, clearly. But I think they're seeing that. I think that's probably part of what this is. And yet, that doesn't mean they're just going to say, well, let's just allow everybody to spend like crazy. And in order to be good, we have to chase the dragon by spending. They will push for rule changes. I mean, maybe it's a luxury tax. Maybe it is a hard cap. Maybe it's a soft cap. What also complicates this, I think, for everybody involved is the problem of competition. If you're the NFL, if you're the NBA, if you're Major League Baseball, you can say, let's have a cap or a tax or some sort of limit on spending, because we're not fighting for the attention of our fans with clubs in Japan or in Mexico or wherever, right? That's just not a thing for the NFL. It's not a thing for Major League Baseball. That people aren't like, well, the MLS, Major League Baseball teams don't spend as much. They're not as interesting. I'm going to go support I don't know. I'm trying to name a Japanese baseball team, and it's not coming to me. But you know what I'm talking about, right? That's a thing in soccer where you have to, and for players too, right? It's a lot about the player market as well. In order to get the best players, you have to spend more money than anybody else, because there are 50, 60 other clubs in the world who can spend that same kind of money or close to it to get that talent. And I don't know what that means for how American owners will view their role in changing the way English football operates. But the other side of that coin, the thing you asked about with Pro Rel in America, I just don't. I don't see a path to. It's not that I don't want it to happen, and this has been my position over the years on Pro Rel. I just don't see a path to it. I don't see a world in which owners willingly choose to put their teams in relegation jeopardy unless the money available through that would completely change their business model for the better. And I don't know how you see that as a possibility.
When you talk to people and you explain to people that are getting into soccer, most folks that I run into really like the concept. The concept of promotion and relegation is exciting. If a team is bad for a number of years, they go away for a while, and if they get good again, they come back. People are
they
excited.
Don't go away. They don't go away. They're not like banished to the shadow realm or something, Robert. They're just, they're in a lower. You could still watch them. It's just a little bit harder, maybe, to find their games. Come on.
And then people who are asking me about like how it all works, think about, so if the American League standards were applied to England, a city like Birmingham, one of the second or third biggest city in England, a team there would just be locked into the top division if it was
right.
solid. And yes. Aston Villa and Birmingham City were pretty rotten for a long time. And so the Premier League would have Birmingham City or Aston Villa just locked in there. And the league would just have these teams just hanging around, and it would just gum up the works. But Aston Villa, there was changes made. They improved, and here they are back into the top third of teams in the Premier League. And I was just saying that opportunity wouldn't present itself over here stateside. And when you put it like that, people get really excited. But people that are business minded, they're saying, that team Aston Villa, they were dog bleep for a long time. And now they're losing money. How would they ever sustain themselves?
Yeah, I mean, I man, this is extremely complicated from where the inception point is for American soccer, right? The promotion relegation began because you had more teams than you could fit into a operational league, a league that could actually be organized in some sort of reasonable manner. And so they said, okay, we'll create a second league. And if you win that one, you get a chance to move up to the top league. American soccer didn't have enough teams for that for a very long time, right? And now we do, and that's a great thing. But then it becomes, well, how do you integrate this? And I'll tell. I mean, again, this is sort of separate to the conversation about American owners in England and whether pro rel would come here. But one thing I consistently talk about is that America, in all of our sports, American sports are based on a league which then populates itself with clubs. So a bunch of rich guys, and this has happened in every sport we have, a bunch of rich guys get together and say, hey, we should have a baseball league. Okay, great. Where should we have teams? Oh, Bob can start a team in Baltimore, and Joe can start a team in New York, and Tom can start a team in Philadelphia, and then we'll play each other. That's great. Let's go do that. That's different than a bunch of workers or a bunch of college kids getting together and forming a club in 18 whatever as it was in England. I mean, it's a very different inception point. Those are clubs that then went looking for a league and then decided to operate. So everybody's viewpoint is the club is the most important entity, and then the league serves the club. That's not how we do sports in America. It's the league, and then the clubs are sort of like, oh, well, we'll expand here, we'll expand there. And so and then you also have this issue of how do you get different business entities? This is just a practical concern to work together, to choose to integrate their leagues, because we've got MLS, we've got USL, we've got all these other, we've got NISA, the alphabet soup of American soccer, and all of them think that their way of doing the sport is the best way. And they're going to say, yes, we're going to voluntarily merge our leagues in some form or fashion. And it's hard to imagine. It's a cynical take on my part, but it's hard to imagine us getting there.
Yeah, but it is cynical, but I think that the environment produces justifiable cynicism.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, you look overseas compared to here, we are taking the American angle here, and we want on this side of the Atlantic to be working in the same direction for a common goal. But you made the point, like everyone's kind of working to their own championships, to their own ends, and not all pulling in the same direction. And then through this show, I hope that we are able to explore maybe not ways to do that, but the benefits and how at least explore those different goals and see how we might be able to pull in the same direction.
Yeah, sure. I hope so. I hope so. And again, the sport continues to grow and get more popular. And if that continues to happen, then there could be pressure. There could be waves of support that could get us moving in those directions. And I respect anybody in American soccer who is working towards what they think is the proper ends of where this game should go. But there are obviously differing opinions on that. And it's not like everybody involved in American soccer thinks that some open system with pro rel is the best way to go. There are plenty of people who don't care about that at all, because they are conditioned to think of sports the way we think of the NFL or the NBA or Major League Baseball. Your team's always going to be in that league. Every single year, your team is going to be in that league. And the only question is, how good will they be? And there's this thing about it's been mentioned here today that your team, there are bad teams in every league and every sport, and you might come into a season thinking really they have no hope. But a majority of teams at least believe that they have a chance to make the playoffs. And then, hey, what happens in the playoffs? Who knows? We could win a championship. And you brought up Aston Villa. And Aston Villa's in a different place. And maybe Unai Emery is changing the complexion of Aston Villa to the point where you can imagine something bigger than just staying in the league, or maybe making Europa League or Conference League. Obviously, then the Champions League this year because of what Unai Emery did. But the idea of Aston Villa winning the Premier League title seems insane, right? At this point in time, it seems insane. Even as good as they are, there's no real belief they're going to win a title. And that's a different mentality of sports fandom that I think is fascinating, because a lot of Americans are adopting European clubs. But you're making a choice about what level of fandom you're going to be able to enjoy, what level of success you're going to be able to enjoy. I've decided to adopt Fulham this year. Like, I fully went in on I've been dancing around picking a European team or a Premier League team for a long time. And I was like, okay, well, maybe Fulham. All the American connections. Again, we make it about us. All the American connections, lots of reason to like Fulham, but they're never going to win a title. And if they get back to Europe, that's about the best I could hope for. Is maybe they get back into a European competition one day. Like, let's just stay up for now. Let's just do that.
I mean, you said that England is kind of coming to terms with what's a sustainable club, and fans are trying to come to grips of like what is ours, and is the ownership going to take this club away? So just to list the Premier League clubs that have American owners, and most of these have all benefited, by the way, from this, or they've improved their foothold: Arsenal, Villa, Bournemouth, Chelsea, Crystal Palace, Fulham, Ipswich, Liverpool, and Man United, all on that list, Premier League teams. And then Everton might make it a 50-50 split with 9 more in the championship and plenty of others spread across the continent.
Maybe Wrexham is going to be a championship team. They've got American ownership. Okay. You bring this up. I think it's interesting that you mention all those teams that have American ownership, but I think it's also important, and I'm not quite sure what it means yet, but it's important to point out that there's a different style of ownership from American owners when it comes to some of those teams. I mean, you have the Glazers, who as a family own Manchester United, right? Now they've sold a portion of it to Ineos and all that stuff, and it's a little bit different now than it used to be, but still, the Glazers own Manchester United. Whereas Chelsea is majority owned by a private equity firm, right? They're owned by a group of investors, essentially, with certain people empowered to be the leaders at Chelsea representing that ownership stake. Right? Todd Bowley's got a portion of the club, but he's a minority shareholder in the team individually. There is Clear Lake that has a much bigger share. You talk about, I mentioned Redbird at Milan. These are not like, oh, billionaire Joe Thomas owns the club. That's not the model. The model now is these are investment vehicles for these groups, and that changes the complexion of how they're operated, right? I don't know exactly how that's going to play out in every case, but I don't like that impersonal element. If the club thrives, I guess the fans don't care, right? If your club is bought by the private wealth fund of a petro-rich country, then and you win trophies, I guess you don't care. But again, the complexion of club ownership has changed a lot over the past decade or so.
Yeah, so to get to the top, the hardline question of this Culture War segment: what happens first, hard American rules in the Premier League or pro rel for USA?
It's the hard rules in the Premier League. I think the chances of that happening anytime soon are fairly slim, but pro rel's not coming to American soccer. It's just not.
The public pressure would have to be, borderline the what was it, the Super League, where all the fans, had the crazy protests, like large scale protests, and English folks are not, public protesters by nature. So that shocked a lot of folks. And can you really see like a fever pitch in America for this sort of wholesale change?
Only way it happens. As much as I would love for it to be a function of fan pressure, the only way pro rel comes to the United States in men's soccer is if a broadcaster, whoever is going to basically fund the league through purchasing television rights and media rights, says, we'll give you lots more money if you institute pro rel. That's the only way it happens. And then there would be some really tough negotiations that would have to happen between very clearly distinct business entities in a country where antitrust law makes it very difficult to sort of operate as a one unitary group in power over the game, right? That's something that is legally extremely difficult in this country. But that's the only way it happens.
U.S. Soccer Federation moving out of soccer, or moving out of Chicago, out of the soccer mansion, kind of takes this daydream away. But I always kind of thought, like, when the United States didn't qualify, I thought that they'd replicate the march towards the mansions in Chicago. When everyone revolted, like had the workers' strikes in Chicago, and they burned down the mansions of all the factory owners back in the day. I thought that we'd have to replicate that in Chicago to get pro rel. And moving away to Atlanta,
the million soccer fan march, is that what you're imagining, Robert? Maybe we can still put that together. Somebody put up a thread on Big Soccer. Let's go.